Jessica Martinez had always been the kind of person who loved attention. At 23 years old, she had built a decent following on social media by posting videos of herself doing outrageous things in public places. Her friends called her brave. Her family called her reckless. She called herself an entertainer. On a bright Tuesday morning in July, Jessica stood outside Buckingham Palace with her phone in hand and a mischievous smile on her face. She had traveled all the way from California to London for this moment. Her followers had been asking for something big, something memorable, and she was determined to deliver. The palace stood magnificent before her, its golden gates gleaming in the summer sun. Tourists crowded around, taking photos and admiring the guards who stood perfectly still in their red uniforms and tall black hats. Jessica watched them for a moment, studying their stone-like faces. She had seen videos of other tourists trying to make the guards laugh or react, but she wanted to do something different, something that would really get people talking. Her best friend, Sophie, stood beside her with a worried expression. Sophie had come along on this trip reluctantly, already sensing that Jessica was planning something foolish. They had been friends since high school, and Sophie knew Jessica's personality all too well. "Jess, maybe we should just take normal pictures like everyone else," Sophie suggested, adjusting her backpack nervously. "These guards are serious. They're not just for decoration." Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Relax, Soph, it's just going to be a quick video. People do this stuff all the time. Besides, what are they going to do? They can't leave their posts?" Sophie bit her lip but said nothing more. She knew that once Jessica made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. She just hoped her friend wouldn't take things too far. Jessica checked her phone, making sure the camera was ready. She had already planned out exactly what she wanted to do. She would walk up to one of the guards, mock his stance, make some jokes, maybe even try to touch his rifle. The video would be hilarious and her follower count would skyrocket. She could already imagine the comments and likes flooding in. She pressed record and started walking toward the nearest guard. He was tall and stood at attention outside one of the sentry boxes, his expression completely blank. His red uniform was pristine, every button polished, every crease perfect. In his hands, he held his rifle at a precise angle. He looked straight ahead, not acknowledging any of the tourists around him. Jessica approached with exaggerated confidence, speaking loudly into her camera. "Hey everyone, Jessica here, live from London. So I'm standing here at Buckingham Palace and I'm about to have some fun with these guards who think they're so tough." Several tourists turned to watch, some smiling, others looking uncomfortable. A few parents pulled their children back, sensing that something inappropriate was about to happen. Jessica walked right up to the guard, standing just inches from him. "Hey buddy, you awake in there?" she said loudly, waving her hand in front of his face. The guard didn't move. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. She laughed into the camera. "Wow, look at this. He's like a robot or something." She began mimicking his stance, standing stiffly and making an exaggerated serious face. Some people in the crowd laughed. Others whispered to each other with disapproval. Sophie watched from a distance, her stomach churning with anxiety. She wanted to pull Jessica away, but she knew it would only make things worse. Jessica hated being embarrassed in public, especially when she was filming. Emboldened by the attention, Jessica decided to push further. She reached out slowly toward the guard's rifle. "I wonder if this thing is even real," she said into the camera, her fingers getting closer to the weapon. Before her hand could make contact, the guard suddenly moved. It was so quick and unexpected that Jessica stumbled backward. The guard stomped his foot forcefully on the ground, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Then, in a booming voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep within him, he shouted, "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." The command was so powerful, so filled with authority, that Jessica felt her heart leap into her throat. For a moment she was frozen, her phone nearly slipping from her hand. The crowd around her went completely silent. Even the cheerful chatter of distant tourists seemed to fade away. Jessica's face flushed red. She had not expected this. In all the videos she had watched, the guards had simply remained still or walked away. She hadn't thought they would actually yell at her. She felt humiliated, standing there with dozens of eyes on her, her camera still recording her embarrassment. But instead of backing away and apologizing like a reasonable person would, Jessica felt anger rising inside her. How dare this guard embarrass her in front of everyone? How dare he ruin her video? She had come all this way, and she wasn't going to let some guy in a funny hat make her look stupid. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "You can't talk to me like that. I'm a tourist. I have rights." The guard returned to his original position, standing perfectly still once more, as if Jessica no longer existed. This only made her angrier. Sophie rushed forward, grabbing Jessica's arm. "Come on, let's go. You got your video. Let's just leave." Jessica shook her off. "No way, this is ridiculous. I wasn't even doing anything wrong. I didn't touch anything." A few tourists began recording the scene on their own phones now. An elderly British couple nearby shook their heads with disapproval. A security officer in a yellow vest started walking in their direction. Jessica noticed the officer approaching and made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of walking away, she turned back to the guard and said loudly, "You know what? These guards are a joke. This whole thing is just a tourist trap. I bet he's not even a real soldier." The words hung in the air like poison. Several British tourists gasped audibly. The security officer quickened his pace. Sophie closed her eyes, knowing that Jessica had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What Jessica didn't understand in that moment was that these guards weren't just ceremonial. They were real soldiers, trained professionals who had served in combat zones, who had earned their position through dedication and sacrifice. They represented something far greater than she could comprehend through her phone screen. The security officer reached them, his expression stern. "Miss, I'm going to need you to come with me," he said firmly. Jessica looked at him with disbelief. "Are you serious right now? For what?" "Disturbing the peace and disrespecting the Queen's Guard. You need to come with me immediately." Jessica's confident smile finally faltered. She looked around at the crowd, at Sophie's worried face, at the guard who still stood at attention, and she realized that this wasn't going the way she had planned at all. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was real, and she was in trouble. The security office inside the palace complex was small and austere. Jessica sat in a hard plastic chair, her phone now confiscated, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Sophie sat beside her, silent and pale. Neither of them had spoken much since being escorted away from the crowd of tourists. The security officer who had brought them in stood by the door with his arms crossed. His name tag read Officer Davies. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested he had seen every type of tourist misbehavior imaginable. Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. She was in a foreign country, in trouble with authorities at one of the most important landmarks in the world. This wasn't just an embarrassing moment that would blow over. This was serious. "Do you understand what you did out there?" Officer Davies asked, his voice calm but firm. Jessica opened her mouth to respond but found she didn't know what to say. Her usual quick comebacks and justifications seemed hollow now. She glanced at Sophie, hoping for support, but Sophie wouldn't even look at her. "I was just making a video," Jessica finally said, her voice much smaller than before. "I didn't mean any harm. I see people do stuff like that all the time online." Officer Davies sighed deeply, as if he had heard this excuse 1,000 times. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from them, leaning forward slightly. "Let me explain something to you, Miss Martinez," he began. "Those guards you were mocking out there are serving members of the British Army. They're not actors. They're not there for your entertainment. Many of them have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones. They've seen things you couldn't imagine. They've lost friends. They've put their lives on the line for their country." Jessica felt her throat tighten. She hadn't thought about it that way. In her mind, they were just part of the scenery, like the palace itself. Officer Davies continued. "When you stand there and mock them, when you try to touch their weapons, when you call them a joke, you're not just disrespecting one person. You're disrespecting their service, their sacrifice, and everything they represent. Do you understand that?" Jessica nodded slowly, unable to meet his eyes. Shame was beginning to replace her anger. She thought about her own grandfather, who had served in the military. He had always been so proud of his service, so serious about the flag and the national anthem. She had never made fun of him. Why had she thought it was okay to do this to someone else's soldier? "What's going to happen to me?" Jessica asked quietly. "That depends," Officer Davies replied. "You're lucky that the guard you bothered chose not to file a formal complaint. He could have. You could be facing charges for harassment and public disorder. But he didn't. Do you know why? Jessica shook her head. Because he's a professional. Because he's been trained to deal with people like you without losing his composure. Because he's better than the situation you put him in. Officer Davies paused, letting his words sink in. However, the Metropolitan Police have been notified. They're deciding whether or not to charge you with a public order offense. Sophie finally spoke up, her voice shaking. She didn't mean it, officer. She just doesn't think sometimes. She gets caught up in trying to get content for her followers and doesn't think about consequences. Officer Davies turned his attention to Sophie. And you? You're her friend. Did you try to stop her? Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I tried. I told her not to do it, but she never listens to me. Then maybe you need better friends, Officer Davies said bluntly. Or maybe she needs to learn that real friends tell you when you're being foolish, even if you don't want to hear it. The door opened, and a woman in a police uniform entered. She introduced herself as Sergeant Thompson from the Metropolitan Police. She was younger than Officer Davies, probably in her 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything immediately. Miss Martinez, Sergeant Thompson said, pulling out a notebook, I need to take a formal statement from you about what happened today. Before we begin, I want you to know that you have the right to legal representation. Do you understand? Jessica's heart pounded. Legal representation. This was really happening. I understand, she whispered. Good. Now, in your own words, tell me exactly what happened. Jessica recounted the events, her voice barely above a whisper. She told them about planning the video, about approaching the guard, about trying to touch his rifle, about what she said afterward. As she spoke, hearing her own actions described out loud, she felt increasingly foolish. What had seemed like harmless fun just an hour ago now sounded cruel and stupid. When she finished, Sergeant Thompson made a few notes and then looked up at her. Miss Martinez, what you did today constitutes harassment and potentially a public order offense. The guard you targeted was well within his rights to use reasonable force to protect himself and his post. You're fortunate he showed restraint. What happens now? Jessica asked, her voice cracking. Now you wait while we decide whether to charge you formally. You'll remain here for the time being. Your friend is free to go if she wishes, as she wasn't involved in the incident. Sophie looked at Jessica, torn between loyalty and frustration. I'll stay, she said finally. Sergeant Thompson nodded and left the room. Officer Davies stood up as well. I'll get you both some water, he said, his tone slightly softer now. It might be a while. When they were alone, Sophie finally turned to Jessica. I can't believe you did that, Jess. I can't believe you pushed it that far. I know, Jessica said, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. It's not about dragging me into it, Sophie said, her own frustration finally breaking through. It's about you not caring about anyone but yourself. It's about you treating everything like it's just content, like real people and real situations are just props for your videos. This has to stop, Jess. This really has to stop. Jessica had never heard Sophie speak to her this way. They had been friends for so long, and Sophie had always been the supportive one. The one who went along with Jessica's plans even when she disagreed. Hearing the disappointment in her friend's voice hurt more than anything Officer Davies or Sergeant Thompson had said. You're right, Jessica admitted. You're completely right. I got so caught up in trying to be famous online that I forgot how to be a decent human being. I forgot that the people I film aren't just characters. They're real people with real feelings. They sat in silence for several minutes. Jessica thought about all the videos she had made, all the stunts she had pulled, all the times she had prioritized views and likes over basic respect and kindness. She thought about the comments from her followers, how they encouraged her to be bolder, to push boundaries, to do whatever it took to stand out. She had been feeding off their validation, letting it make her feel important and special. But sitting in this security office, facing real consequences for the first time, she realized how empty it all was. Those followers didn't care about her as a person, they just wanted to be entertained. And she had been willing to humiliate others and disrespect important institutions just to give them what they wanted. Officer Davies returned with 2 bottles of water and a packet of tissues. He set them down on the table without a word. Jessica took a bottle and drank, realizing how dry her throat had become. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded and returned to his position by the door. The waiting continued. Jessica checked her watch, though she wasn't sure what time it was or how long they had been there. Without her phone, she felt oddly disconnected from the world, like she was floating in a strange space where time moved differently. She found herself thinking about the guard she had bothered. What was his name? What was his story? Had he really served in combat? What had he thought when this annoying American tourist had approached him, mocking him while he was trying to do his job? She would never know, and that bothered her more than she expected. After what felt like hours, Sergeant Thompson returned to the room. Her expression was unreadable as she took her seat across from Jessica and Sophie. Officer Davies straightened slightly by the door, his attention fully focused on what was about to be said. "Miss Martinez," Sergeant Thompson began, opening a folder she had brought with her. "I've reviewed your case with my superior officers and consulted with the palace security team. I've also had a conversation with the guard you harassed today." Jessica's stomach dropped. The guard had talked about her. She could only imagine what he had said. "He's agreed not to press charges," Sergeant Thompson continued. "However, this doesn't mean you're free to go without consequences. The palace has decided to issue you with a formal warning. You're being banned from all royal properties in the United Kingdom for the next 5 years. This includes Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Kensington Palace, and all other Crown Estate properties. 5 years. The words echoed in Jessica's mind. She had been planning to visit more sites during this trip, but now that was impossible. More than that, it was the shame of it. She had been banned, officially banned from some of the most historic places in the world because of her own stupidity. Additionally, Sergeant Thompson went on, you'll be receiving a fixed penalty notice for public disorder. The fine is £300. You have 28 days to pay. If you fail to pay, the matter will go to court, and you could face prosecution. Do you understand? Yes, Jessica said, her voice barely audible. I understand. Your phone will be returned to you, but I strongly advise you to delete that video. If you post it online, you could face further legal action for harassment and causing distress. The palace takes these matters very seriously, especially in this age of social media. They will monitor for any footage of this incident appearing online. Jessica nodded quickly. I'll delete it. I promise. I won't post anything. Sergeant Thompson studied her for a moment as if trying to determine whether she was being sincere. I hope you understand how fortunate you are, Miss Martinez. In some cases, tourists who behave inappropriately toward the Queen's Guard have faced prosecution, significant fines, and even brief detention. The only reason you're being treated with this level of leniency is because the guard himself requested it. He requested it? Jessica asked, surprised. Why would he do that? Because, Officer Davies interjected, he's a good man who believes in giving people second chances. He said, and I quote, that you seemed young and foolish rather than malicious. He hoped that this experience would teach you something without ruining your life. Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes again. This man, whom she had mocked and disrespected in front of dozens of people, had shown her more kindness and understanding than she deserved. He could have made things much worse for her, but he had chosen mercy instead. I want to apologize to him, Jessica said suddenly. Please, is there any way I can tell him I'm sorry? Sergeant Thompson and Officer Davies exchanged glances. That's not really how things work, Sergeant Thompson said. The guards don't typically have direct interaction with tourists outside of their official duties. But surely there's some way, Jessica pressed. I need him to know that I'm truly sorry, that I understand now what I did was wrong. Officer Davies considered this for a moment. I can pass along your apology through the proper channels. Write it down if you like, but I can't promise he'll see it or respond. He handed Jessica a piece of paper and a pen. With shaking hands, she began to write. She wrote about how ashamed she was, how she had never stopped to think about who these guards really were or what they represented. She wrote about how she had been so focused on getting attention online that she had forgotten basic decency and respect. She wrote about how grateful she was for his mercy and how she would never forget this lesson. When she finished, she folded the paper and handed it to Officer Davies. He took it without comment and placed it in his pocket. You're free to go now, Sergeant Thompson said, standing up. But remember what I said. No posting about this incident. No videos, no photos, no social media posts about what happened here today. If anything appears online, we'll know it came from you, and the consequences will be severe. I understand, Jessica said. Thank you. Thank you for being so understanding. Sergeant Thompson's expression softened slightly. I hope you really do learn from this, Miss Martinez. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it chasing validation from strangers on the internet. Focus on being someone you can be proud of, not someone who's just famous. Those words hit Jessica harder than any of the warnings or threats had. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Officer Davies led them out of the security office and back toward the public areas. As they walked, he spoke quietly. You know, I see dozens of young people like you every week. They all think they're being clever or funny, that the rules don't really apply to them because they're just making content. But those rules exist for good reasons. Respect exists for good reasons. I know that now, Jessica said. I really do. Good, Officer Davies replied. Then maybe something positive will come from this after all. They reached the exit and Officer Davies handed Jessica her phone. Remember what Sergeant Thompson said. No posting. I won't, Jessica promised. I'm deleting the video right now. She opened her phone and navigated to her video files. There it was, the recording of her approaching the guard, mocking him, saying those awful things. She watched just a few seconds of it and felt sick. How had she ever thought this was entertaining? How had she been so blind to how terrible she was being? She pressed delete and confirmed the action. The video disappeared. It's gone, she showed Officer Davies. He nodded approvingly. Good decision. Now I suggest you and your friend enjoy the rest of your time in London. There's plenty to see and do here. Try to make better memories than this one. Jessica and Sophie stepped out into the afternoon sunshine. The palace was still there, majestic and beautiful. Tourists still walked around, taking photos and enjoying their day. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the world had simply moved on without acknowledging Jessica's mistake. But for Jessica, everything had changed. Sophie finally spoke. Well, that could have been a lot worse. I know, Jessica said. I'm so sorry, Soph, for everything. For dragging you here. For not listening to you, for putting you through that. Sophie looked at her friend, really looked at her, and saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. She saw genuine remorse. She saw someone who had actually learned something from their mistake. Apology accepted, Sophie said. But Jess, you have to promise me something. You have to promise that this is it. No more stunts. No more doing stupid things for views. No more treating people like they're just content. I promise, Jessica said. I mean it. I'm done with all of that. They started walking away from the palace, heading toward the underground station. Jessica kept glancing back at the building, at the guards still standing at their posts. She wondered which one had been the guard she had bothered. She wondered if he knew she had written him an apology. She wondered if he would ever forgive her. As they descended into the station, Jessica pulled out her phone again. She looked at her social media apps, at her follower counts, at the notifications waiting for her. For years, these numbers had defined her self-worth. Every like, every comment, every new follower had felt like proof that she mattered, that she was special. But now, looking at those numbers, she felt nothing but emptiness. What was the point of having thousands of followers if she had to sacrifice her integrity and respect for others to keep them? What was the point of being internet famous if it meant being a terrible person in real life? On impulse, she opened her profile settings. Her finger hovered over the account deactivation button. Sophie noticed what she was looking at. You don't have to do that, Sophie said. You just have to use it differently. Jessica thought about this. Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe the problem wasn't social media itself, but how she had been using it. Maybe she could keep her accounts but change what she posted, change how she interacted with people, change her whole approach. She closed the settings without deactivating anything. You're right, she said. I'll keep it. But things are going to be different from now on. I hope so, Sophie said. I really hope so. They rode the train in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Jessica stared at her reflection in the dark window of the carriage and barely recognized the person looking back at her. Back at their small hotel in central London, Jessica sat on her bed staring at her phone while Sophie took a shower. The room was modest but comfortable, with 2 single beds, a tiny bathroom, and a window that looked out onto a busy street. The sounds of traffic and distant conversations drifted up from below. Jessica's social media accounts were exploding with notifications. Her followers had noticed her absence. Where are you? Someone had commented on her last post from 2 days ago. We need new content. Another had written. Some were growing impatient. Are you even in London? Post something. She had built her entire online presence on constant updates, daily videos, hourly stories. Her followers expected regular content, and she had always delivered. But now, for the first time, she didn't want to give them what they wanted. She didn't want to perform. She didn't want to reduce her life to bite-sized entertainment for strangers. Her finger hovered over a new post. She could write something vague, something about taking a break or needing time to recharge. But even that felt dishonest somehow. The truth was, she had messed up badly, learned a difficult lesson, and didn't want to pretend everything was fine. Sophie emerged from the bathroom, toweling her hair dry. She glanced at Jessica and saw the troubled expression on her face. "Still thinking about what happened?" Sophie asked, sitting on her own bed. "Yeah," Jessica admitted. "I keep wondering about that guard, about what he must think of people like me, about how many tourists probably bother him every single day." "Probably a lot," Sophie said. "But most of them probably aren't as aggressive as you were." Jessica winced at the words, even though she knew they were true. "I was awful, wasn't I?" "You were," Sophie confirmed, but her tone was gentle. "But you know that now. That's what matters. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," Jessica said honestly. "I thought I knew who I was. I thought I was this confident, entertaining person who made people laugh and gave them fun content to watch. But today showed me that I was actually just selfish and disrespectful. I built my whole identity on getting reactions from people, and I never stopped to think about whether those reactions were worth having." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "You know what I think? I think you got addicted to the attention. And like any addiction, it made you do things you wouldn't normally do. It made you cross lines you shouldn't have crossed." "You're right," Jessica said. "It's like I couldn't stop myself. Even when you told me not to do it, even when I saw the guard and knew I should leave him alone, I just couldn't resist. I had to make that video. I had to get those likes. So what now?" Sophie asked. "Are you going to quit social media?" Jessica thought about this question seriously. "I don't think I need to quit completely, but I need to change everything about how I use it. No more stunts. No more pranks. No more bothering people for content. If I'm going to post anything, it needs to be genuine and respectful." "That sounds good," Sophie said. "But your followers might not like it. They're used to the old you." "Then maybe I need new followers," Jessica replied. "Or maybe I just need to stop caring so much about follower counts." They ordered room service for dinner, neither of them feeling up to going out. As they ate their fish and chips, Jessica's phone buzzed with a call from her mother. She hesitated before answering, knowing her mother would ask about the trip and what they had been doing. "Hi, Mom," Jessica said, trying to sound cheerful. "Jessica, how's London? Have you been to the palace yet? I want to see all your videos." Jessica's chest tightened. She glanced at Sophie, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Actually, Mom, I need to tell you something. Something happened today at the palace." She told her mother everything. About the video she had planned, about harassing the guard, about getting detained by security and police, about the fine and the ban. As she spoke, she heard her mother's breathing change, could imagine the disappointment on her face. When Jessica finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jessica Maria Martinez," her mother finally said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "What were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking, Mom, that's the problem. I was so focused on getting content that I didn't think about anything else. But I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. And I'm going to change. I promise." Her mother sighed deeply. "You know, your grandfather served in the military for 20 years. He always said that the worst kind of person was the one who disrespected a soldier's service. How do you think he would feel if he knew what you did today?" Jessica felt tears forming in her eyes. Her grandfather had passed away 2 years earlier, and she still missed him terribly. He had been disappointed in her social media antics even before he died, though he had never said so directly. But she had seen it in his eyes, the way he would shake his head when she talked about her latest viral video. "He'd be ashamed of me," Jessica whispered, "just like you are." "I'm not ashamed of you," her mother corrected. "I'm disappointed in your choices, but you're my daughter and I love you. What I want to know is whether you've learned from this. Are you going to make better choices from now on?" "Yes," Jessica said firmly, "I am. I swear to you, Mom, things are going to be different." "Good," her mother said. "Then something positive can come from this. Use this experience to become a better person, Jessica. That's all I ask." After the call ended, Jessica felt emotionally drained but also somehow lighter. Telling her mother the truth had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. No more hiding behind her online persona. No more pretending everything was perfect and fun all the time. Sophie had been listening quietly. "That took courage," she said. "I'm proud of you for being honest with her." "Thanks," Jessica said. It felt like the right thing to do. They spent the rest of the evening watching British television and talking about their plans for the next few days. They would visit the museums, walk through the parks, see the shows. They would be normal tourists, taking normal photos, having normal experiences. No stunts, no drama. Just two friends enjoying a city. Before going to sleep, Jessica checked her social media one more time. She decided to post something simple and honest. "Taking a break from regular posting to reflect on some things," she typed. "Sometimes you need to step back and think about what's really important. Life isn't just about content and likes. It's about being a good person." More soon. She posted it without overthinking and then put her phone on silent. Within minutes, the comments started flooding in. Some followers were supportive. Others were confused or critical. A few accused her of being fake or attention-seeking. But Jessica didn't read any of them. She had said what she needed to say, and that was enough. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Jessica thought about the guard again. She imagined him going home after his shift, taking off his uniform, becoming just a regular person. Did he have a family, children? What did he do in his free time? What were his dreams and fears? She would never know the answers to these questions, but thinking about them made her realize something important. Every person she had ever filmed, every stranger she had pranked or bothered for content was a real person with a complete life beyond the few seconds she had captured on camera. They all had stories, feelings, families, struggles, and joys, and she had treated them like props. The weight of this realization was almost crushing, but it was also necessary. Jessica knew she had to carry this feeling with her, to remember it every time she was tempted to go back to her old ways. This discomfort, this shame, this regret was the price of her education, and she would pay it gladly if it meant becoming someone better. Sophie's quiet breathing from the other bed indicated she had fallen asleep. Jessica closed her eyes and made a silent promise to herself. She would use the rest of this trip to practice being a better person. She would be kind to service workers. She would respect other people's space and boundaries. She would see the world through curious eyes rather than through a camera lens looking for viral moments. Tomorrow would be a new day, a fresh start, and this time she would get it right. The next morning, Jessica woke up feeling different. The shame from yesterday was still there, sitting heavy in her chest, but alongside it was something else. A sense of purpose, maybe, or determination. She wasn't quite sure what to call it, but she knew she wanted to be better than she had been. Sophie was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee from the little kettle in their room. She looked out at the London street below, watching people hurry past on their way to work. "Morning," Jessica said, stretching. "How long have you been up?" "About an hour," Sophie replied. "I've been thinking about what we should do today. I was looking at the Imperial War Museum. I thought maybe we could go there." Jessica sat up, surprised. "The War Museum? Why there?" Sophie turned to look at her friend. "Because I think you need to understand what those guards really represent. What military service actually means. You can't just apologize and move on without truly understanding what you disrespected yesterday." Jessica felt a knot form in her stomach, but she knew Sophie was right. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's go." They got ready in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Jessica picked out simple clothes, jeans, and a plain sweater. Nothing flashy or attention-seeking. She pulled her hair back into a simple ponytail and didn't bother with much makeup. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked ordinary, unremarkable, and somehow that felt appropriate. The Imperial War Museum was a striking building with 2 large naval guns positioned at the entrance. As they approached, Jessica felt her anxiety growing. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew it would be uncomfortable. Inside, the museum was quiet and respectful. The exhibit stretched across several floors, documenting conflicts from World War I through modern-day operations in the Middle East. Jessica and Sophie started on the ground floor, moving slowly through displays of uniforms, weapons, and personal artifacts from soldiers. What struck Jessica most were the personal stories, not the grand narratives of battles won and lost, but the small human details. A letter from a soldier to his mother, Never sent because he died before he could mail it. A photograph of a young man in uniform, smiling confidently with a caption noting he was killed 3 weeks later at age 19. A diary entry from a nurse describing the overwhelming number of wounded soldiers she couldn't save. Jessica stopped in front of a display about the Queen's Guard. She read that many of the guards came from elite regiments, like the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, and Scots Guards. These units had long and distinguished histories, having fought in nearly every major British conflict. The men and women who served as ceremonial guards at the palaces were active-duty soldiers who earned their positions through exemplary service. One panel featured interviews with current guards. Jessica read their words carefully. One soldier talked about serving in Afghanistan, about losing 3 members of his unit in an ambush, about the nightmares that still woke him up at night. He said that standing guard at the palace was an honor, a way to represent all soldiers who had served and sacrificed. When tourists mocked him or tried to make him react, he said, he thought about his fallen friends and remained professional because that's what they would have wanted. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She thought about how she had waved her hand in that guard's face, how she had called him a joke, how she had treated his service like it was meaningless entertainment. The full weight of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. Sophie appeared beside her, reading the same panel. She didn't say anything, just put a hand on Jessica's shoulder. They moved through more exhibits. They saw the effects of war on families, on communities, on entire nations. They watched video testimonies from veterans who described what combat actually felt like, not the glorified version from movies, but the real experience of fear, chaos, and loss. They read about the long-term effects of trauma, about soldiers who came home changed, struggling to readjust to civilian life. In one section, there was an interactive exhibit where visitors could experience a small fraction of what soldiers went through, a dark room with sudden loud noises and flashing lights, simulating the sensory overload of combat. Jessica and Sophie went through it together. Even though they knew it was just an exhibit, even though they were completely safe, the experience was terrifying. Jessica's heart raced, her hands shook, and she felt an overwhelming urge to run. It lasted only 2 minutes, but when they emerged, both of them were shaken. Imagine living with that fear for months, Sophie said quietly. Imagine that being your reality every single day. Jessica couldn't speak. She just nodded, her throat too tight with emotion. They spent 3 hours in the museum reading every placard, watching every video, absorbing every story. By the time they left, Jessica felt fundamentally changed. She understood now, really understood what she had disrespected at the palace. It wasn't just one guard. It was generations of sacrifice, courage, and service. It was young people who had given up their lives, their health, their peace of mind for something they believed in. As they stepped back out into the afternoon sunlight, Jessica felt exhausted, as if she had been carrying something heavy for hours. In a way, she had been. The weight of her new understanding was substantial. "Thank you for bringing me here," Jessica said to Sophie. "I needed to see all of that." "I know you did," Sophie replied. "And I'm glad you were open to it." They walked to a nearby cafe and sat by the window with cups of tea. Jessica stared into her cup, watching the steam rise. "I want to do something," she said suddenly. "Something meaningful. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can do something positive to balance it out somehow." "Like what?" Sophie asked. "I don't know yet. Maybe volunteer with a veterans organization when we get home, or use my platform, what's left of it anyway, to share stories about real soldiers, real service members. Not for views or likes, but just to help people understand what I didn't understand." Sophie smiled. "I think that's a great idea. But you have to mean it. You can't do it just to make yourself feel better or to rehabilitate your image." "I know," Jessica said. "And I do mean it." "I really do." Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and saw dozens of notifications from her social media accounts. Her post from last night had generated hundreds of comments. Some followers were concerned, asking if she was okay. Others were angry, demanding she explain what was going on. A few influencer friends had messaged her privately, asking what had happened to cause such a sudden change. Jessica picked up her phone and, without reading any of the comments, opened her camera. She looked at Sophie. "Would you mind if I recorded something? Not for entertainment, not for views. Just to be honest with the people who follow me." "What are you going to say?" Sophie asked. "The truth," Jessica said. "Or at least as much of it as I can without violating what the police told me." Sophie nodded. Go ahead. Jessica turned the camera to face herself. She didn't try to find good lighting or adjust her angle for the most flattering shot. She just started recording. Hi everyone, she began, her voice steady but quiet. I know a lot of you are wondering what's going on with me. Why I suddenly stopped posting. Why I said I needed to step back. The truth is I messed up. Really badly. I did something disrespectful and hurtful, and I got called out for it in a way that made me realize I've been doing things wrong for a long time. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I've spent years creating content that was all about getting reactions, about pushing boundaries, about doing whatever it took to go viral. And I told myself I was just being entertaining, just giving you guys what you wanted. But the truth is I was being selfish and disrespectful. I was treating real people like they were just props in my videos. I wasn't thinking about their feelings, their dignity, or their humanity. Jessica felt her voice waver slightly but pushed through. Yesterday I visited the Imperial War Museum here in London. I learned about what real service and sacrifice look like. I learned about people who gave up everything for something greater than themselves. And it made me realize how shallow and meaningless my approach to life has been. I've been chasing fame and attention while these people were chasing honor and purpose. She took a deep breath. So I'm changing. Not because I got in trouble, although I did. Not because I'm trying to save my reputation, although I probably need to. But because I genuinely want to be a better person. I want to create content that matters, that helps people, that shows respect and kindness instead of just seeking shock value. Jessica looked directly into the camera. If that means I lose followers, then so be it. If that means my videos don't go viral anymore, I'm okay with that. Because at the end of the day, I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror and like the person I see. And for too long, I haven't been able to do that. She ended the recording and looked at Sophie. Should I post it? Do you want to? Sophie asked. Jessica thought about it. Yeah, I think I do. Not for the response, but just to be accountable. To put it out there that I'm trying to change. She posted the video without any caption, no hashtags, no attempt to optimize it for engagement. Then she put her phone face down on the table and finished her tea. How do you feel? Sophie asked. Scared, Jessica admitted. But also relieved. Like I finally stopped pretending. 3 days later, Jessica and Sophie were preparing to leave London and head home to California. Their hotel room was scattered with luggage and souvenirs, mostly books and small keepsakes rather than the flashy items Jessica usually collected for photos. The trip had turned into something completely different from what Jessica had planned, but in the best possible way. Jessica's phone had been buzzing constantly since she posted her honest video. The response had been mixed, as she expected. Many of her longtime followers were supportive and impressed by her vulnerability. They shared their own stories of learning difficult lessons and making mistakes. Some even thanked her for being real for once, admitting they had always felt her content was too forced and performative. But plenty of others were critical. Some accused her of faking the whole thing for attention. Others were angry that she had changed, demanding she go back to her old style of content. A few influencer acquaintances had unfollowed her, perhaps seeing her transformation as a threat to their own similar approaches. Jessica had lost nearly 2,000 followers in 3 days. Surprisingly, she didn't care as much as she thought she would. Every time she felt that old anxiety about her dropping numbers, she remembered the guard standing at his post, the stories in the museum, the shame she had felt sitting in that security office. The followers she was losing weren't the ones she wanted anyway. What mattered more were the new connections she was making. A veterans organization had reached out after seeing her video, asking if she would be interested in volunteering when she returned home. A documentary filmmaker who focused on military stories had messaged her with resources and suggestions for how she could use her platform more responsibly. Even a few active duty service members had written to say they appreciated her honesty and growth. Sophie was folding clothes into her suitcase when there was a knock at their hotel room door. They exchanged confused glances. They weren't expecting anyone. Jessica opened the door to find a hotel staff member holding an envelope. Miss Martinez, this was left for you at the front desk. For me? Jessica took the envelope, puzzled. Who left it? I'm not sure, miss. It was here when I started my shift this morning. No return address. After the staff member left, Jessica stared at the envelope. It was plain and white, with just her name written on the front in neat handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. As Jessica read the words, her eyes widened and tears immediately began to fall. Sophie rushed over.
What is it?
What's wrong? Jessica couldn't speak. She just handed the letter to Sophie, who read it aloud. Miss Martinez, I received your written apology through the proper channels. I want you to know that I accept it. We all make mistakes, especially when we're young. What matters is whether we learn from them. The fact that you took responsibility and showed genuine remorse tells me you're on the right path. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan and lost friends there. I stand guard at the palace to honor their memory and to represent all who serve. It's not an easy job, especially when tourists see us as entertainment rather than soldiers. But it's an important one. I hope your experience has taught you to see beyond the surface, to understand that every person you meet has a story worth respecting. I wish you well in your journey to become the person you want to be. Remember, character isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and doing better. Respectfully, Guardsman J. Thompson, Grenadier Guards. Sophie finished reading and looked at Jessica, who was crying openly now. He wrote to you, Sophie said softly. He actually took the time to write to you. Jessica wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve his kindness. Maybe not, Sophie said gently. But he gave it to you anyway. That's what grace looks like, Jess. That's what real strength looks like. Not holding grudges, not punishing people forever for their mistakes, but giving them a chance to be better. Jessica read the letter again, memorizing every word. Guardsman J. Thompson. Now he had a name. Now he was even more real to her than before. She imagined him sitting down after his shift, tired and probably dealing with his own challenges, taking the time to write to someone who had disrespected him. The generosity of that act was almost overwhelming. I need to keep this forever, Jessica said. I need to remember this whenever I'm tempted to go back to my old ways. She carefully folded the letter and placed it in her journal, the one she had started keeping during this trip. Over the past few days, she had been writing down her thoughts and feelings, processing everything she had learned. It was private writing, not for social media or public consumption, just for herself. The letter from Guardsman Thompson would be the most precious entry in that journal. They finished packing in thoughtful silence. As they zipped up their suitcases, Sophie spoke. You know, I'm really proud of you. I know this trip didn't go the way you planned, but I think it went exactly the way it needed to. Me too, Jessica agreed. I came here thinking I was going to make great content and have an adventure. Instead, I got humbled and learned the most important lesson of my life. What lesson is that? Sophie asked. Jessica thought for a moment. That other people aren't supporting characters in my story. They're the main characters in their own stories, and I need to treat them that way. Every single person I meet has depth and value and deserves respect. Whether they're a royal guard or a hotel clerk or a random stranger on the street. They took one last look around the hotel room to make sure they hadn't forgotten anything, then headed down to check out. The hotel lobby was busy with other guests coming and going. As Jessica stood at the front desk settling their bill, she noticed a young woman, probably about her age, taking selfies in the lobby. The woman was posing dramatically, making exaggerated expressions, clearly creating content for social media. Jessica felt a pang of recognition. That had been her just a week ago. Always performing, always on, always thinking about how things would look online rather than actually experiencing them. She felt no judgment toward the woman, only understanding and a slight sadness for the authentic experiences she might be missing while being so focused on the performance. As they wheeled their suitcases toward the exit, Jessica paused and looked back at the woman. For a moment, she considered approaching her, sharing her story, warning her about the pitfalls of living for content, but she decided against it. Everyone had to learn their own lessons in their own time. You couldn't force growth on someone who wasn't ready for it. The taxi ride to Heathrow Airport took nearly an hour in heavy traffic. Jessica watched London pass by through the window, seeing it differently now. She saw people living their lives, each with their own struggles and joys and stories. She saw workers and families and tourists and locals, all worthy of respect and consideration. At the airport, they checked their bags and moved through security. As they waited at their gate, Jessica pulled out her phone. She had been mostly avoiding social media for the past few days, only checking sporadically. But now she opened her messages and scrolled through them. Most were the usual mix of supportive and critical comments. But one message stood out. It was from a high school teacher in Ohio who had shown Jessica's honest video to her students as part of a lesson on digital citizenship and personal responsibility. The teacher wrote that it had sparked an incredible discussion about social media, respect, and the importance of thinking before posting. Several students had apparently been moved by Jessica's vulnerability and had committed to being more thoughtful about their own online behavior. Jessica stared at that message for a long time. This was it. This was the kind of impact she had always wanted to have, but had been going about it completely wrong. She had been trying to impact people through entertainment and shock value, when what really mattered was authenticity and honesty. She wrote back to the teacher, thanking her for sharing the message and offering to do a video call with her class if they were interested, not as a famous influencer, but as someone who had learned an important lesson and wanted to help others avoid making the same mistakes. "You're smiling," Sophie observed. "What happened?" Jessica showed her the message from the teacher. Sophie read it and smiled too. "See? Good things come from honesty. Real things. I'm starting to understand that," Jessica said. Their flight was called and they boarded the plane. Jessica settled into her window seat, Sophie beside her. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Jessica thought about what she would do when she got home. She had already reached out to that veterans organization. She was planning to delete most of her old videos, the ones that relied on pranks and boundary pushing for views. She wanted to start fresh, creating content that actually mattered. But more than that, she wanted to focus on real life, on being a good friend to Sophie, who had stuck by her through everything, on repairing her relationship with her mother, who deserved a daughter she could be proud of, on finding purpose beyond social media metrics and viral moments. The plane lifted off and London disappeared below them. Jessica pressed her hand against the window, a silent goodbye to the city that had changed her life. She thought about Guardsman Thompson, probably back at his post by now, standing guard with honor and dignity. She thought about his fallen friends, the soldiers he represented, all the people who had sacrificed for something greater than themselves. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing he would never hear it but needing to say it anyway. Sophie had put in her headphones and closed her eyes, already drifting toward sleep. Jessica pulled out her journal and the letter from Guardsman Thompson. She reread his words, especially the last part. Character isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and doing better. She had fallen down hard, but she was getting back up. And this time she would do better. She had to, not for her followers, not for her reputation, but for herself, for the person she wanted to be when she looked in the mirror, for the friend her grandfather would have been proud of. Jessica closed her journal and settled back in her seat. Through the window she could see nothing but clouds and sky. Somewhere below was the life she was leaving behind. Somewhere ahead was the life she was choosing to build. And for the first time in a long time she felt genuinely excited about the future. 6 months had passed since Jessica returned from London. It was a cold February morning in California, and she stood in the parking lot of the Veterans Affairs Community Center, clutching a bag of supplies and trying to calm her nerves. This was her 3rd month volunteering here, but she still felt anxious before each session. The center was a modest building in a working-class neighborhood, with faded blue paint and a flagpole out front. Inside, veterans gathered for support groups, job training, health services, and social activities. Jessica had started by helping in the kitchen, serving meals and cleaning up. But over time, as the staff and veterans got to know her, she had been given more responsibilities. Today, she would be helping facilitate a digital literacy class for veterans who wanted to learn how to use social media to connect with family or find employment. It was a strange full-circle moment for her, teaching others about the platform she had once used so recklessly. "Morning, Jessica," called out Frank, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s who coordinated volunteers. He had been skeptical of her at first, this young woman with her smartphone and her past as an influencer. But she had shown up consistently, worked hard without complaint, and listened more than she talked. She had earned his respect. "Morning, Frank," Jessica replied, heading inside. The building smelled like coffee and old carpet, a comforting smell she had come to associate with purpose and community. In the classroom, 5 veterans were already waiting. There was Marcus, a young man who had served in Iraq and was trying to reconnect with his daughter through video calls. There was Linda, a Gulf War veteran learning to use social media to promote her small business. There was Robert, who wanted to join online support groups for PTSD but didn't know how to navigate the technology. Each of them had a story, a reason for being here, and Jessica treated each one with the care and respect they deserved. She set up her laptop and projector, preparing a simple presentation about online safety and digital etiquette. These lessons had taken on new meaning for her. She taught them about privacy settings, about thinking before posting, about treating people online with the same respect you would show in person. Everything she taught them was something she had learned the hard way. "All right, everyone, let's get started," Jessica said once everyone was settled. "Today we're going to talk about creating professional social media profiles and how to network online." As she taught, she felt something she had never felt during her influencer days. A sense of genuine usefulness. These people weren't here for entertainment. They were here to learn real skills that would improve their lives. And she was helping them not for views or likes, but because it was the right thing to do. During the break, Marcus approached her. He was 26, just 3 years older than Jessica, but he carried himself with a weariness that made him seem much older. He had lost part of his left leg in an IED explosion and walked with a prosthetic. "Hey, Jessica, I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "I talked to my daughter on video chat for the first time in 8 months last week. She's 6 and she barely remembered what I looked like. But now we can talk every day. That's because of what you taught me." Jessica felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That's wonderful, Marcus. I'm so happy for you. I looked you up, Marcus continued. "I found your old videos, the ones you haven't deleted yet. I saw what you used to be like. And I gotta say, I'm impressed by the change. Not everyone has the guts to admit they were wrong and actually become a better person." "Thank you," Jessica said. "That means a lot, especially coming from you. I learned the hard way that real respect has to be earned, not demanded or faked." After class ended, Jessica helped clean up and then checked her phone. Her social media presence had changed dramatically over the past 6 months. She now posted maybe twice a week, always thoughtful content. She shared stories from the veterans she worked with their permission. She posted about causes she cared about. She occasionally shared personal reflections on growth and change. Her follower count had stabilized at about 30,000, down from nearly 80,000 at her peak. But the engagement was different now. People actually read her posts, left meaningful comments, had real conversations. The numbers were smaller, but the impact felt bigger. She had also started a small side project. Using what remained of her influencer connections and her video editing skills, she created short documentary-style videos highlighting individual veterans and their stories. She partnered with the VA Center and other organizations, producing content that helped veterans find jobs, housing, and support. The videos weren't particularly viral, but they were useful. They changed lives. Sophie met her for lunch at a small cafe near the VA Center. Their friendship had deepened significantly since the London trip. Without the distraction of Jessica's constant need for content creation, they actually talked about real things now. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's successes, and simply enjoyed spending time together. "How was class?" Sophie asked as they settled into a booth. "Good. Marcus is making real progress. He's talking to his daughter regularly now." "That's amazing," Sophie said. "You're doing important work there, Jess." "It doesn't feel like work," Jessica admitted. "It feels like the first time I'm actually contributing something meaningful to the world. All those years of chasing viral fame, and I was just adding noise. Now I'm trying to add value." Sophie smiled. "Your mom would be proud." "Actually, I know she is proud. She told me so last week." Jessica's relationship with her mother had improved significantly. She called home regularly now. Not just when she needed something, but to actually connect. Her mother had even come to visit and had volunteered at the VA Center with Jessica for a day. Seeing her daughter serve others with humility and purpose had moved her deeply. "I'm thinking about going back to school," Jessica said suddenly. "Maybe studying social work or psychology. I want to be able to help people in more substantial ways." "I think that's a great idea," Sophie encouraged. "You'd be good at it. You understand what it's like to struggle and change." After lunch, Jessica drove to a nearby park where she often went to think and write. She sat on a bench overlooking a small pond and pulled out her journal. She had filled 2 journals since London and was starting her third. Writing had become her way of processing her experiences and tracking her growth. She opened to a fresh page and began to write about Marcus, about the joy in his voice when he talked about seeing his daughter's face on a screen, about what it meant to have real impact on someone's life. As she wrote, she thought about Guardsman Thompson's letter, which she still carried with her in her wallet. She pulled it out and read it again, as she did often. Character isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and doing better. She had fallen down spectacularly in London, but she had gotten back up. And every day she was doing better. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the veterans organization she had been working with. They wanted to feature her story in their newsletter, about how a former influencer had found purpose in service. They asked if she would be willing to be interviewed. Jessica smiled and typed out a response. Yes, she would do the interview. Not because it would get her attention, but because maybe her story could inspire other young people who were lost in the pursuit of online fame. Maybe someone else could learn from her mistakes without having to make them themselves. As the sun began to set over the park, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jessica thought about how different her life was now compared to 6 months ago. She was happier, more fulfilled, more at peace with herself. She had fewer followers but more real connections. She had less attention but more purpose. She had learned that true respect couldn't be demanded or manufactured. It had to be earned through consistent, genuine actions. She thought about the guard at Buckingham Palace, standing at his post with honor and dignity. She hoped he was doing well wherever he was. She hoped he knew that his decision to show her mercy rather than punishment had changed her life trajectory completely. His kindness and his letter had given her permission to become someone better. Jessica closed her journal and headed back to her car. She had dinner plans with her mother and needed to stop by the grocery store first. As she drove, she passed a group of teenagers taking selfies on a street corner, laughing and posing for their phones. She smiled, remembering when that had been her entire world. She didn't judge them. Everyone had to find their own path. But she was grateful that her path had led her here, to this place of purpose and growth and genuine connection with others. That evening, sitting at dinner with her mother, Jessica received a text from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she read it. Miss Martinez, this is Officer Davies from Buckingham Palace Security. Guardsman Thompson asked me to pass along a message. He saw the work you've been doing with veterans in California. He wanted you to know he's proud of your transformation. Keep up the good work. You're making a difference. Jessica showed the message to her mother, tears streaming down her face. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. See, her mother said softly. Good things happen when you choose to be good. Jessica nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had traveled thousands of miles to London seeking attention and validation, only to find humiliation and shame. But from that low point, she had discovered something far more valuable than viral fame. She had discovered purpose, integrity, and the deep satisfaction that comes from serving others. She typed out a response to Officer Davies, asking him to thank Guardsman Thompson for his continued kindness. She told him about the veterans she was helping, about Marcus and his daughter, about the lives being changed through simple acts of service and education. She thanked him again for seeing potential in her rather than just punishing her mistake. After dinner, as Jessica drove home through the quiet California streets, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the harsh lesson that had woken her up from her shallow existence. Gratitude for Sophie's loyalty and honesty. Gratitude for Guardsman Thompson's mercy and wisdom. Gratitude for the opportunity to make amends by serving others. She had gone to London thinking she was somebody important because of her follower count and viral videos. She had returned understanding that true importance came from how you treated people, how you contributed to the world, and whether you had the courage to admit your mistakes and change. The girl who had disrespected the Royal Guard was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the weight of respect, the value of service, and the power of genuine human connection. It had been a harsh lesson, but it had been exactly what she needed. As Jessica pulled into her apartment complex, she looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere across an ocean, Guardsman Thompson was probably finishing his shift, taking off his uniform, returning to his regular life. He would never know the full extent of how his actions had rippled outward, how his decision to show mercy had transformed not just one person, but the lives of all the people Jessica now served. She made a silent promise to him and to herself. She would continue this work. She would continue growing, learning, and serving. She would honor his kindness by being the person he had believed she could become. Jessica got out of her car and walked to her apartment, her journal tucked under her arm, her heart full of purpose and her mind clear about who she wanted to be. The harsh lesson had been learned. The transformation was ongoing. And the future, for the first time in her life, felt genuinely bright.